Hello and welcome to the Real Success Show. I'm your host, Candice Mama. If you are returning, welcome back. And if this is your first time, welcome to the Real Success family. We are so happy to have you. Please be sure that you like, share, and subscribe so more people can find us. I am thrilled for today's guest because she happens to be one of my favorite people. Kate Gray is one of Australia's top visionary entrepreneurs. She's the founder of Boss Bee Business, and I cannot wait to dive into this conversation. So without further ado, here's Kate Gray. I am so happy to see you.
You too. You too. You look beautiful.
Thank you. And so do you, as always. But I mean, Kate, I want us to jump in because I know that you and I can talk forever, and I don't want to actually miss even a moment of magic because
perfect.
Almost everything we say to each other is so magical.
Basically, we're amazing, of course.
But welcome to the Real Success Show. Thank you for taking time out of your busy life to join us.
It's an absolute pleasure. I love Real Success. They're like my family, my worldwide family. I would do anything for you and for them.
Oh, no. And you are our family. You really are, Kate. Yeah. And I mean, I'm so lucky that I've had so many conversations with you, and in each and every one, I always leave feeling so much more, I don't want to say enlightened because I don't want people to think like, oh, she's just throwing around enlightened. But I just genuinely feel so much better for it. And so I want to start us at the beginning. For people who do not know who Kate Gray is, how do you describe yourself?
Oh, that's such a good question. Well, what part of myself? Because I feel like I'm ever evolving and changing. So maybe evolving, like I'm an evolving entrepreneur who has a niche and a love for marketing and branding. And I help people build organic seven-figure businesses, specifically coaches and consultants. And I love life. Like I just love making a difference in the world. What's a really big thing for me is helping people build seven-figure businesses, not for the seven-figure part, like that's amazing, but because money equals units of choice. And I believe we all deserve to have autonomous choice and wealth in our life. And if I can inspire others and help others build that, then I will die a happy human.
Oh, I love that. I love how you frame money. And it's an interesting way to frame it because, Kate, you're not someone who's always had money, right? So this is something that is new, well, not new now because you've been, wealthy and successful for a while, but it's something that you really built up over time. So do you want to take us back to just before Kate made it, the life before?
Yes.
You have a very interesting life.
I know. I feel like it's a movie sometimes that I'm describing and I'm like, was that my life or is that like some weird movie that I watched? It was definitely my life. I can attest to the fact I lived it. So I came from Tasmania, which is a tiny island at the bottom of Australia. It's the most beautiful place in Australia, in my opinion. And I grew up with a father who was not overly kind to me. He was emotionally and psychologically abusive, which left me feeling like I wasn't enough. So I always sought to find the enoughness outside of myself, which I think many of us do. I think most humans do at some phase in their life, right? And that led me into drugs and partying. And ultimately, I lived on the streets for a good 6 months, which is not that long. Like it seems like, oh, it's a big deal. But when I think about, brothers and sisters across the world, like fellow human beings that have been on the streets for 10 years, I feel pretty lucky, if I'm honest. And I ended up with a meth addiction. So the saving grace for me, which I'm so grateful for, was actually sounds weird to say this, but my dad got cancer. And when he got cancer and I got the call from my mum and I had no money, I was living on the street, she flew me back to Tasmania, and healing my relationship with him and holding his hand while he passed changed my life. And that's what really started me on this path. And at the time I didn't know I was an entrepreneur. I just knew I wasn't employable, clearly. And I didn't like being told what to do. Like, there were all these traits, but I just didn't know that that was set for entrepreneurship. And then I went to university. I did a degree in Buddhist philosophy and psychology, and the rest is kind of history. I just kind of stumbled around and eventually found myself as an entrepreneur.
Wow. I mean, every time I hear your story, and I mean, this is not even the in-depth version. It's so mind-blowing. And Kate, there's so many people, right? Especially now, we're living in a global pandemic that is now almost 2 years long. And I know so many people have experienced some sort of a setback, some sort of a challenge. I don't think anyone's untainted by this time. And for those people who are still at what I would define as rock bottom, how did you work your way out of rock bottom into this place where you felt like I can actually take control of my life?
Yeah, such a good question. There in Australia, we have this thing called AFL football, Australian Rules Football, or the Australian Football League is the name of AFL. And it's the, I don't know if you've seen it on YouTube, but it's like pretty good looking guys in small shorts running around, chasing a ball. And there was, where I'm from in Tassie, it's a big deal. Big deal. And there was a football player who was from my mum's era called Tommy Hafey, and he's passed now. But he was famous for doing all these push-ups every day, right up until the day he died. He did 100 push-ups. And he used to have this saying, and it was, if it's meant to be, it's up to me. And I remember when my father passed, and I was like, you know what? My dad wanted to be an artist. He had all these dreams, but he was too afraid to follow them. He didn't have the courage to step outside of the system. So he worked in a factory for 25 years, to the point where when he passed, he had 5 years worth of sick pay up his sleeve. His whole time he was sick, it was paid leave, because he had worked so much over 25 years, like almost 7 days a week. And I think that was to kind of distract him from the fact that he gave up on his dreams. And so for me, when he passed, I really had to go, well, I have really one shot at this. Potentially we come back. I hadn't discovered Buddhism at that time, where, the whole idea of reincarnation, I was like, there's kind of no dress rehearsals here. And I remembered that saying from Tommy Hafey from when I was a kid. My mum used to like listen to him, and she loved him. She'd talk about him all the time. He played for her favorite team. And I was like, wow, he's right. If it's meant to be, it's up to me. I can't control external circumstances. I can't control the pandemic. I can't control the lockdowns, but I can control how I show up every day. I can control the state in which I live my life from. That I can control. When I started to take control of that, the world outside of me began to change.
Wow. And it sounds a lot like taking that accountability is the first step. Right. And I think, why is that the most difficult step, though?
So true. Why is it the most difficult step? Touche. Sounds so easy in theory. Well, I mean, the brain being a survival organism or organ, it wants us to stay in what's familiar. Because familiar equals safety for the brain. So your brain's job when we were being chased by lions, which is far more realistic for you guys over there, we're only chased by kangaroos, although they can really give you quite the punch. I don't know if you've ever seen them on YouTube. They're fierce. But back in the day when we had the potential threat of predators, we needed this survival mechanism in our brain to make us run from things that were unfamiliar, to protect us, to preserve life. But what's happened is, as we've evolved or de-evolved, it remains to be seen, really, doesn't it? We've still got that mechanism, and that mechanism stops us from evolving and moving forward in the direction we say we desire, because the brain sees it as unsafe because it's not familiar. So I believe, on a basic biological, psychological level, that's why.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense, though, because I think what a lot of people, when you say comfortable or familiar, people are like, but there's nothing comfortable about this, Kate. But it's that inner instinct, right? It's what feels familiar to the soul more than it is what we consciously are thinking at any given point.
Yes. Right. Yeah, totally. Yeah. And the brain, what's interesting, that's such a good point, is the brain, if there's two uncomfortable options, one being staying where you are, the other being moving out of it to something new, the brain will always choose the familiar option. which is why you just keep recreating, why we keep recreating the same situation. So if two options are painful, it would choose the least painful, the path of least resistance, right? So what happens?
That's so interesting. I did not know that, but it makes so much sense. And so once you got into that acknowledgement and saying, I have to change my own life, you ended up going to university. And as much as we'd like to think that university gives us the golden map to life, it helps. But how did you
It does help.
How did you craft your path from studying Buddhist philosophy to becoming like a 7-figure business, entrepreneur?
Yeah, that's such a good question. So university got me a whole lot of time in the uni bar. That's what it definitely got me. I was in the philosophy society, and like Australia is a big drinking culture. And I chose not to drink a little while ago because it kind of made me a little slow in my mind, and I like to be quick. But the philosophy society at uni used to meet in the bar. So I spent a lot, of course, we philosophized over beer. But how did I get from there to there? Well, I just tried things. Like there's a book called The Big Leap by Gay Hendricks, I believe his name is, and he talks about failing forward. So I didn't really know in the early days, like who I was or what I was going to do. I just knew some things felt more free and some things felt more entrapped. And what I mean by entrapped is having a job does not feel good for me. And it didn't feel good for the people employing me because I didn't stay around for very long. But so I just would follow kind of what felt free, really, what felt free. And I would create things like I did dance for a really long time, so ballroom dancing. So I started when I was a kid, and then when I went off the rails, I stopped. And I started again in my early 20s. And so I started a dance teaching business for a while, and that felt good because I got to dance and I got to teach people to dance, and I was working for myself. And then I went into being a personal trainer because I was like, oh, well, like I can stay fit and I can still dance and I can make money and work for myself. And then I eventually, because early on, when I studied Buddhist philosophy and psychology, I started experimenting with psychedelic medicines, and they are things like ayahuasca, psilocybin, and they're really huge now. Like a lot of like the Johns Hopkins Research Center in America has done extensive research on using psilocybin mushrooms to ease the existential pain of people that have terminal illness. Like they're wonderful, and and the whole lot of them are magic. They expand your consciousness. Now, I'm not saying they're for everyone because they're not. Actually, some people should run very quickly in the other direction and not have them. Very bad. However, it changed my life, and it was one of the catalysts that got me off meth, and it got me clean because it allowed me to find a connection within myself. I believe the symptom that causes addiction is disconnection. So it cured the symptom, the reason, not the symptom, the cause. The cause of addiction is disconnection. And so what happened is I did all of that, and then I found myself going, I want to share that with other people. I'm not necessarily qualified. Like I'd been studying Buddhist, Zen Buddhism for a long time by that point, probably about 10 years. So I'm not qualified to be a shaman, and I don't pretend to be a shaman, but I know a lot of them. Maybe I can put together retreats where people can come together, and like me, or maybe people that are just wanting to have a better relationship with their parents, or people that just want to heal their money problems. Maybe they can come, and I can do the mindfulness element and the Zazen element and the reconnection, self-inquiry element. And I can bring in shamanic practitioners to help them journey with the plant medicines. And so that was my first 7-figure business. And it was so aligned and so magical at the time. We traveled the world to different locations where it was legal, because I didn't want to do it where it was illegal. I'm a rebel, but I don't want to go to jail. So we went to countries where it was legal, and it was extraordinary. It went to 7 figures. We started with 0 capital, 7 figures in 18 months, which I know people have beaten that figure. It's, whatevs, but it was pretty cool. It was the first kind of experience of doing something that I loved, that I would do for free again and again and again.
Oh, you said so many things, and I want to go down all the different avenues. But the one thing that literally I got chills when you said it is the cause of addiction is disconnection. Ah, that is powerful. That is powerful,
Yeah.
because what you're speaking about is what we would in mainstream society call, oh, this is a proper addiction in air quotes, which is drugs or alcohol. But people have addictions to all kinds of things, food, love.
Everything.
Social media now has become a huge addiction for many people. And when you speak about disconnection, for people who are listening, what does that disconnection mean? What is disconnection in practice and in reality?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I can only speak from my experience, and my experience is very weighted in the Buddhist kind of like ideologies. And so mine is the ability to sit with discomfort. Disconnection is the ability to look at the things that we need to look at to move through and transcend and evolve, but we don't want to look at. In psychology, they call it trauma blocking. And that can manifest in like scrolling through social media, food, all the things that you mentioned. It doesn't have to necessarily be alcohol. Addiction to love, ultimately addiction to dopamine, like some sort of rush. So we feel good, because human beings, as we've evolved, that's why I made that kind of, wasn't that funny, but the joke about how we de-evolved or evolved, but we've evolved where we're these creatures of like extreme comfort. Like, look at the world we've built around us. Like, no longer in the early days of humans' lives, in many of the ancient tribes, they would have initiation practices for the youth, where they would have to go and sit out in the bush or the jungle by themselves for a night and experience fear and discomfort. And they would evolve into like a man or a woman. Like, women would have to sit in huts. Yeah, that's gone in our society. So we've evolved to just want to feel good. And when we want to feel good all the time, we become disconnected. Because being human doesn't mean we feel good all the time. We're going to feel crap sometimes. And the ability to sit with that is definitely what I learned from Zen, and what I feel is kind of missing in our culture.
Oh man, that hits so many points, because the initiation process that you also speak about is something that in South African culture, especially African, like, Black African
Yeah.
culture, is a big thing. And I remember my younger brother went through it, and I think it was like 3 weeks of going into the mountains, as we call it, and just kind of, living in this man-made tent, and everything was so uncomfortable. But I remember thinking to myself, or the boy my brother went in as is not the man he came out as. And I think it was that, that knowingness, because it's in hardships we get to really know ourselves, right? And I think when, as you said, as we disconnect from ourselves, as we run away from discomfort, then we're running away from ourselves essentially, and then we escape into all these little things. And would you say that that ability to sit in discomfort is exactly why you are so successful today?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And by my standards, I have so much more to go. Like, I never assume to myself that I am successful. I'm looking at like Musk and all of these people. I'm like, oh, how do I get there? Like, I want to go there. But I think, actually, speaking of Musk, he said something. I read an interview with him, and he said, that the makeup or the DNA of an entrepreneur is very much decided by whether somebody can keep moving forward in the face of complete adversity, in the face of the world falling apart, of everybody hating you, of being alone. If you can keep moving forward in that, you will make it. It's not an if, it's a when. And so absolutely, in response to your question, totally.
Oh, I love that. It's not an if, it's a when. And I think if we do look at history and we do look at big, massive crises that happen around the world, I mean, we're not new. This is our, defining crisis in history.
Yeah.
But every single time there comes out like a new breed of millionaires, billionaires, entrepreneurs, designers, buildings, it's always so interesting to see. So it's, are you going to sit in this space and be, someone who's going to be like, no, I can't do anything, and crippled by it? Or are you going to be someone who creates something from it? And
100%.
Kate, you work with so many people. And what's the one thing when you are coaching clients that you find to be one of the biggest resistances to your coaching or to your methods?
Well, this is such a good question. I actually have a friend, and he is he's like a mindset. Like, that's such a silly thing to say. He's so much more than mindset. He's got a degree in psychology. He's like done somatic, anything to do with human performance and optimization. And he specifically works with entrepreneurs, and he has this theory. And I think it's exactly it. He's like, there's 3 types of entrepreneurs that will eventually struggle at different phases, and they will stay stuck until they can transcend it. The first is the planner. So the ability to actually take action and not just sit in the planning all the time. So one of the main reasons people will have issues is they'll want to create ideologies and philosophies and ideas and strategies, but they'll never ever take action. Like, those people drive me bonkers because I'm such a results oriented person. That's one of the I guess common themes. The second one is the dabblers. So there are people who will take a part of my strategy and they'll apply it, but then they'll take a part of 25 other people's strategies and listen to everybody, and then nothing will come to fruition because they're just literally going round and round in circles. And the next one is the hustlers. So the people that have hustled to get themselves, and this was me, hustled to get themselves to a certain point, but they reach exhaustion and burnout and they can't go any further. They burn everything down. And I reached that point. So the collective, I think, theme for all of them is ultimately they sabotage themselves in those various ways because they're either afraid of success or they're afraid of failure. Most people, it's afraid of success, I would say. Because again, it breaks identity coherence. They shift out of the familiar, but it manifests in different ways.
Self-sabotage. I love that because it's so prevalent, right? Whether we call it the imposter syndrome or whatever it is, failure, or whatever we coin as a term, it all comes down to self-sabotage. So you said that you were the hustler and you did reach this point where you burnt out and you were like, okay, I'm done. How did you get through that? Like, how did you manage to get yourself to a place where you were no longer self-sabotaging and you were in the flow again?
Yeah, good question. So I work a lot with the archetypes as I don't know if you saw my last talk, I'm bringing it to the next summit, so I'm excited. So I work a lot with the archetypes, and I learned about them years ago at university, and I've worked with them for a long time. Never really shared about them because I thought people would think I was crazy, but I accept now that everyone will assume what they want anyway, so I talk about it. But I had to step into the creator archetype, and the creator archetype is about creating structure in chaos to find a new way that is evolved, more optimized, and better. So I had to find a new, evolved, optimized way to have the same level of success with ease and flow so that I could transcend to the next level. So I had to burn it all down and literally, in the chaos of burning it down, find a new way, create a new path for myself.
Are you now comfortable with fear though? Because I feel like when you said burn it all down, the first thing that came into my mind was most people would be petrified to do that. Petrified.
Yeah.
So you find that you have a better relationship with fear.
Yeah, I think I don't actually, that's such an interesting question. So I know that we spoke about this last time we spoke, and there's a book by Thich Nhat Hanh it's called Fear, but funnily enough, and he's like the most amazing Zen monk. I love and adore him. And he speaks about all fear is boiled down to the fear of death. Every fear, it makes sense, right? Really, because the brain thinks if we move outside the familiar, it will be certain death. It doesn't understand. It thinks if our family all of a sudden hate us or don't like us because of our newfound entrepreneurial path, we will die. But, and a part of us will die, but there's a part of us that stays very alive and it will evolve. It's the resistance to evolution of self, I think, what happens, because the brain thinks as the self evolves, because it'll have to shed part of itself, that it will die, but it actually doesn't. It's like a butterfly. But I do think that years ago, I sat with a medicine called the God molecule. I speak about this a lot because a lot of people have presuppositions about psychedelics. They think they're drugs. They're medicines. They're gateways to the unknown, which is really important for me on my soul's journey in this lifetime. And this medicine is known as a God molecule because they believe that it's an Amazonian medicine. It's actually from Mexico, from the Sonoran Desert, and it's come from the secretion of a toad, the Bufo alvarius toad. And you inhale it through a smoke, and basically you return to the state of God, whatever that means. And for me, it was death. It's like I died. And as I came out of that, well, firstly, I disappeared and I became everything and nothing at the same time. So all that I read as a Buddhist, all that I studied, all that I theorized in my mind, I experienced in a moment. And the moment was probably 3 minutes, but to me, it felt like a lifetime. That to me was death. And from that time on, I've slowly let go of the fear of death. It's definitely brought it up really strong afterwards, but I slowly begin to delayer it to the point where it's just not there. So I don't have the fear. I'm like, oh, well, people hate me, whatever, that's happened. Oh, well, I could die. Oh, well, kind of did anyway. That's happened. Whatever, just keep moving. Like I'm more for the forward momentum of experience than being weighted in the fear of death.
So it's which is better, right? Like that's the really becomes
Yeah.
the question. Am I going to choose to be alive or am I going to choose to die? Because betrayal of self is
Yeah.
a piece of you dying all the time, right? And then
Yeah.
you have to
Yes.
choose you. So I love that
Yes.
thought pattern.
Yeah. Well, I survived it, right? So worst case scenario is, oh, what if I die? Or for example, let's like boil it right down. People go, oh, what if people hate me online if I start to advertise my brand? I'm like, well, that happened to me. I got put into this anti-spirituality group like back in the day, like maybe 6 years ago, and they reamed on me. Like I had like thousands of comments of people going, look, it was advertising my program, which was called Beyond Ego, which is hilarious. But I was like talking on the beach and do my program, blah, blah, blah. You know, you find yourself beyond ego, which is so funny now, but I got put into this anti-spirituality group on Facebook and thousands of people commented going, I hate this woman. I want to punch her. I want to stab her. I want to murder her. Just hate, hate, hate. And so that was my worst nightmare. And I survived the same way as I survived a metaphorical death. So when you survive success or death or being judged and you find the other side of it, then the brain goes, oh, it's safe. And then you can keep going.
Jeez. It's always incredible to me when the internet does go into that strange place of hate and venom, because I too have experienced the lovely trolls of the interwebs. And it's always to me, I'm like, you don't know me. You probably have kids at home and you are trolling like a woman in the middle of nowhere, right? And Kate, but you know what I find very interesting based on your experience, and I read a recent post of yours, and I've experienced the exact same thing, which is, there's this one category of being trolled and really just, I'd say, demonized on the internet. That is actually hurtful. Like people don't think it's hurtful, but when you're dealing with it, it's really hard, right? Then you do survive that. Then you come out on the other side. But what I found that is very interesting is that I'll still come to the other side, but then there'll be small, subtle changes I make to something else, right? Like I think you had a beautiful post about, how you're going to start posting again. You're going to just speak your mind, and if people don't like it, they don't like it. And I know for me, sometimes, like I used to have that, not anymore on my social media, but I used to think to myself, I don't want to post this because if I post this, then, it was a small voice, but it was small, but it was big enough for me not to post what I wanted to post. And so how do you like deal with that as you see, like you can deal with this big thing, but it can still trickle into your life in some way. And so how do you deal with it when it comes up? Do you just look at it and say, okay, I see you now, I'm going to change it? Or do you sit with it for a while?
It depends on the intensity of like the physical reaction or to the thought, to be honest. Like if it's an intense physical somatic reaction to the thought, I will sit with it a little to let the energy diffuse before I act, because I like to act from a place of choice and stillness opposed to neurosis, which is what most humans live in, myself included. So it depends. I do think Buddhist practices of questioning, well, yes, it was Buddhist, but I also went down the self-inquiry, the Advaita, the Muji, the Ramana Maharishi, the Papaji path for a while, and I spent time in India. But I learned to question the thoughts. So when we begin to question the thoughts, like I don't believe anything I think. I'm always questioning it. Like I'm just like, is that my intuition or is it my ego wanting to be validated? I don't know. I'm just gonna like kind of let it unfold for itself. So I think that helps a lot. But if there's a strong somatic reaction, generally that means that I have unfacilitated trauma around it in the past, and I need that to move before I'll take action.
Question the thought. That is so interesting because I've seen on social media, especially the quote that says, always trust your feelings, right? And I don't actually believe that. I'm like, don't always trust.
I don't either.
You
It's a terrible idea.
Terrible idea. You will be unemployed. You will have no friends and family if you're always trusting your feelings. Because sometimes you're just hungry.
Agreed.
If I have a feeling before I eat, I'm probably just hungry. So
angry.
Exactly, but coming back, I love that concept of questioning the thought. I love the idea of sitting with it in stillness. And when you take that and you apply it to your life in general, do you find that you feel at this time in your life that every arena of your life is in balance and is in sync? Or are there certain parts of your life that you're still like, I still want to put in more work here?
Yeah, good question. I'm always wanting to like be better, whatever that means. Like I'm always assessing. I have lots of room. There are some areas in my life that I find highly triggerable and others that I'm like completely neutral in. Anything to do with injustice. I get ropeable, I get really angry. And that's, obviously because of my conditioning and my identity and my upbringing. So that I struggle with, and I have to really sit with it and question, the validity of the thoughts and the validity of my perception. But there are other things that I'm like, meh, all good. I'm currently the Dalai Lama. It just depends on what it actually is.
You speak about triggering. I know it's a very, widely used term in psychology and spirituality. What does triggering feel like to you?
An energetic response somatically. So an energetic, almost like an electric shock sometimes, or maybe it could show in the heart starts to race, or you feel like a blocking in your throat or your tummy or your shoulder, or you start to feel hot, or some sort of reaction in the body. For me, it will come with a thought generally, but I do generally try and identify it in my body for sure, because the body is a storehouse of our whole life, our whole identity, our whole existence. So I think it's important to give respect and reverence to what's happening in the body in terms of triggering. We can't think our way out of things. We can't feel our way out of things. We have to do both. They have to come together.
That is beautiful. Bring it back to business. I love what you've called your business. I love that you decided to call it Boss Bee Business. Why did you choose that term in particular? Because that is going to, either people are going to be like, that's incredible, or some people are going to be like, how dare she?
Yeah. Well, that's the reason why, right there. Exactly why. So when I built the brand, I definitely play in the rebel archetype. So one of the archetypes I use is the royal archetype, and the other is the rebel. So the rebel really kind of gathers their people through polarization. And so that name in itself is extremely polarizing. And so I know my people through the fact that they're not uber sensitive to linguistics. If somebody's going to get caught up on linguistics, they're not going to like me because I swear. They're not going to like me because sometimes I make no sense. I'm not perfect. I have spelling errors. I have terrible grammar. Blame Bill Gates because of the Microsoft Word when I went to uni. It's absolutely not my fault. It's totally my fault. But so they're not going to be my people. So I'd use that name to filter them out before they even come into my sphere.
Filtration. That's great. That is amazing. So already you're coming into a space where you know that the people that are going to be there are going to be more aligned with your vision. And when you were crafting the archetypes, because I love that you keep referring to the archetypes, and I'm so excited to hear all about it. When you were crafting them, when did you start really thinking around the concept of archetypes and how we can implement it in our lives and in business?
Well, personally, I've thought about archetypes for the last 17 years. There's a teaching in Kabbalah. So I was obsessed with religions and obsessed with cults and philosophies and ideologies, all, sorts of, as we do. I think those of us on the spiritual path, we eventually find ourselves researching that at some point. And I remember, obviously we went over it at uni, but I remember reading a thing about Kabbalah, which is the mystical version or mysticism version of Judaism. And it said, the one who embodies all 12 archetypes will become enlightened. And I was like, interesting, because I was obsessed with being enlightened for a large portion of my life. I was like, that's interesting. And so my love for it started to go into that. And how I brought it into business was through experience. I personally, like you, I'm sure, and like many people listening, I was evolving at such a rate that I was showing up inconsistently to my market. So I'd create something and then within a week I'd be bored with it, but now I've got to sell it and deliver it. I was like, oh crap, damn it. And I'm bored with that now. So, and I'm also a creator. If you look at Wealth Dynamics, which we run our team, and I run how I show up in my business through Wealth Dynamics as well. And it's very common for us to get bored with our own creation. So when I started to realize this, I was like, okay, well, how can I build a brand that's still authentic, but is consistent? Because I personally, this soul is not consistent. She's shifting and changing all the time. I was like, well, if all 12 archetypes are within us, can't I just pull on specific archetypes to build an avatar that is a representation of me, but not fully me, so I can keep evolving personally, but I have this hat I put on when I step into my business that is consistent in my market. That's how.
That's so interesting. So you say there are 12 archetypes, right? Is it 12 that
12.
you... Okay.
Yes.
And so are there certain dominant archetypes that you find that are more prominent in like the world, or do we each and like have, all 12 archetypes and we always just constantly rotating?
Yeah, such a good question. I love it. Okay. So Jung believes, this is from Carl Jung. Jung believes that all 12 of them are in the collective unconscious of the world and they exist within each and every one of us. However, generally we're more dominant with our public. There's 3 public archetypes we wave in and out of and 3 personal. So that's kind of what you would do on your own or with people that really know you. And sometimes they're the same 3 and sometimes they're different. Sometimes people will waver in and out of 6. However, they all exist within you. And if I look back throughout my life, and you're probably the same, I can see the evolution through all of the archetypes. And now, which is interesting, is I recently retested myself. I'm the same 3 publicly as I am privately. I'm exactly the same 3. So that was fascinating. It's almost like the mask or whatever I was wearing, I've just let it go. And now I just am as I am. But that's taken a long time.
Wow. Does that have anything to do with like authenticity? Is that what it is? Or like being more aligned? Or what do you think brings that like about?
I think so. Maybe I'm just older and I don't care. Maybe, I don't know. As you get older, you're not old, you're so young, but when you get to my age, I'm just like, whatever. Like, people are going to make up stuff about me. I might as well just be myself. This is like care factor, maybe.
But it's true though. I think it takes so much less energy just showing up authentically in the world than it does to be like, who in front of this person, I'm like this, and then this person, because you're just like, eventually the worlds are going to collide and it's going to all become a mess.
Yeah, exactly. And then get reborn into something else.
But tell me something, what are the archetypes? Are they, like you said, they're 12, and you said that each of us would have 6, more or less, or 3 public, 3 personal. Within that, when you are working with a client and they show a prominent, like, particular archetype, are certain archetypes more likely to become successful as opposed to others, or are all of them likely to be successful? It's just how you manifest it.
Well, we get to choose it essentially when we're building a brand, for a personal brand or a company. So they will be successful providing the actual brand avatar of the business, whether it's an individual personal brand or the company, because I work with both, are chosen on ones that are a message to market match. So when you're curating or architecting a brand avatar, I call it, which is using the archetypes to build a face for your brand, whether it's personal or company, it's built based on what the market needs to see, not what you want to project. So I'll give an example. So for me, I personally play in the innocent, which is the utopian, like childlike optimist, sometimes a little annoying. And I play in the magician, and I play in the jester. So they're my personal ones. The jester's funny. The magician's about creating magic. Joe Dispenza is a traditional magician, which is super cool. Actually, I could probably do all of the real success speakers and their archetypes. That would be fun. Actually, that would be so fun. So that's what I do personally and privately. But my business is rebel, queen, and creator. So that's what my market needs to see in order to invest in me and see me as a solution to their problem. So the archetypes you choose to turn up within yourself, because they're all already there, you just show some and not others, the same way as you would with personal and private. We've just added an extra spectrum, which is business, which Jung didn't do because he never worked with businesses or companies, but we've just added an extra one. And we turn up the ones that need to be turned up for our market to notice us and see that we're the solution to their problem. So, for example, Richard Branson, he naturally definitely is the rebel and the jester, and Virgin has been built on the rebel and the jester for sure. Like if you look at all the publicity stunts he did, dressed up as a female flight attendant, climbed out of buildings, went to space, like you can totally see that. And it's often the creator of the thing will have similar archetypes to the company. Like Apple is definitely creator. Steve Jobs was definitely creator, but he was probably more dominant sage, which is the wisdom. Like John DeMartini is traditional sage. So the point being is that it's not about what we are personally or publicly, it's about what our market needs to see. So we find those within ourselves. Often they'll be the same or a couple or what we've played in before, and then we turn those up, and then they decide the font, the color, the brand voice, the personality, how we show up, all of it. And then we step into that, and then we step out of that when we're not in our business.
I absolutely love that. Like for me, I'm geeking out as you're speaking. I'm just like, this sounds amazing. Give me more. But what makes a successful brand? I mean, because I completely believe that in today's society, every individual walking, if you have got an Instagram, a social media, whatever, you are a brand. And then I think there's also obviously a business brand. So in your opinion, what makes a successful brand?
A brand that's, I'm going to speak as a coach. So for me, if I define a successful brand as a coach, it sells out my programs before I have to get on a sales call. That's a successful brand.
Wow.
That's what Apple does. Apple does that time and time again. Or Samsung, if you're an Android person. People are ready with their credit cards before they even walk into the shop to invest, no matter how much that Apple phone is, because Apple as a brand has sold the product before they even need to be sold to. That is a successful brand. And that's what using the archetypes allows us to do.
Wow. And that's a brilliant example, because I mean, Apple doesn't even sell a full charger anymore. Yet there we are swiping away. I'm like, right. How are you going to sell me a phone and not even give me the thing to charge it with? They're like, assemble it yourself at home.
I know, it's hilarious. I was like, okay, we're going here.
It's like buying a car and they're like, oh, the keys don't come with the car. It's like, what am I supposed to do? Start it with my finger? Like, how does this work? That's a brilliant.
Totally, exactly.
Oh man.
Exactly.
And Kate, talking about brand, what then would you say makes a successful personal brand? What makes Kate Ray as the person, like, you know, appeal or, you know, people like or invest in?
I understand the psychology of my market. So I understand that people buy who I am, not what I offer, even if they're not conscious of that. They buy who you are, not what you sell. So if you can communicate who you are, the life you live, the message you have, the why you have, the mission you're on clearly through what you say and what you do online, you're done. Like it's sealed and delivered, like legit. Like it's like easy peasy.
I love it because that is so true. Oh, we are coming towards the end and I've got 3 questions for you. But the first one is,
Okay.
what are the mottos? Like if there was a motto, one or two mottos that you live your life by, what would they be?
Definitely Tommy Hayfies. I hope that if he's in the spirit world, he's like listening to this. If it's meant to be, it's up to me. Like it's like my mantra. If it's meant to be, it's up to me. If it's meant to be, it's up to me. It's definitely one. Let me see. I don't even know if there's a third one. My mind's pretty empty most of the time. I think that to me epitomizes everything, because even if I'm stuck and something's not manifesting how I want through aligned action, I realize it's because of me. It's something I'm not doing. So I just come back to myself. It's like, is it my frequency? Is it the action I'm taking? Is it the language I'm using? Like, what is it? I think to me, that epitomizes everything. If it's meant to be, it's up to me. Come back to yourself. What is it that you are or aren't doing to not or to achieve said result you desire?
I absolutely love it, because it comes down to accountability, complete accountability, because then you can change it. If it's anything out of your control, then you're like, I don't know, I'm just going to wait and see.
Exactly.
Okay. What is real success to you?
Freedom. So me personally, real success is defined by being able to do what you want, when you want, with who you want, how you want.
I love it. I absolutely love it. And the final question, Kate, is, what is one thing about Kate Gray that we would not find on Google?
I'm a little bit of a decentralized wealth nerd. I really like looking at digital currencies. I find it fascinating. I find the whole financial institution and the financial system so fascinating. I have the 12 axioms of wealth, the 12 axioms of, I think it's called Swiss banking, but I call it the 12 axioms of wealth. It's on my bedside table, and it's something that's like a Bible for me. I know, it's so nerdy. I'm fascinated by it.
I absolutely love it, because I would have never guessed.
It's weird, right?
I think it is fantastic. And I think it's, those small things about someone that, they present one thing to the world, and then you ask this question, and it's always such a cool, like, nugget of information, because you're like, huh.
I had no idea.
No, it's like more so, I need to go Google that. That's exactly what I was thinking. I'm like, okay, I'm going to need to go Google that and brush up on my currencies. Oh, Kate, this has been so fun, so just, informative. And thank you so much for sharing so gracefully of your time with myself and the Real Success family. I so appreciate you.
Oh, the feeling is so mutual. You are one of my favorite humans. Real Success is my family. One day we will all be together. We will meet. I'm like convinced on it. I was thinking of it today. So thank you so much for what you do and who you be in the planet. Like, we really need you, specifically in times like this, and also for Real Success. Like, the world needs what they're offering. Like, it's an honor to even walk beside both of you.
Oh, thank you, Kate. That was amazing. And if you're anything like me, I geek out over archetypes. I think it's a great way to get to know your clients, to get to know yourself, and to get to know people in your life. I absolutely loved it. Please tell us what stood out for you in this conversation. And if you are not a part of the Real Success Club, be sure to check us out. The link will be in the show notes below. And if you have not attended any of our summits, be sure that you have registered. We always love having you. It will be in the show notes below. And if this is where you choose to leave us, thank you. And I look forward to seeing you again next week.